Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that aims to redefine what it means to reach our full potential by exploring how movement and mindset impacts our lives and how we can all work to show up as the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder and coach at TEC, and I want to kick this episode off with an all call for coaches, health and fitness professionals, dietitians, nutritionists. If you are in the health and wellness space, and you are frustrated with the growth of your business, if you are struggling to make the money that you want to make, if you're struggling to understand how to attract and retain your ideal client, if you struggle to charge what you feel like you're worth, then I am speaking to you. TEC, the company that I founded, is a business accelerator for people like yourself. Individuals in the health and wellness space that want to grow profitable businesses but are struggling to do so. We have spent the last decade putting together all of the resources that you need to address the specific pain points that individuals in this space face when they are working to grow and scale their businesses. We address that in three primary ways. We look at revenue. How do you make money? This is a primary pain point that individuals in this space, in the coaching industry, face, and we address that very tactically and help you put systems in place and develop skills to make the revenue that you want. We also address client acquisition and retention. How do you attract the right client, specifically a client that is willing to pay you what you're worth, recognizes your value and what you bring to their lives, and how do you retain that client? How do you stop the incessant, consistent, constant running around and chasing new clients? This is one of the biggest pain points in our industry, is that we're always trying to fill our rosters. If we can keep the clients we have, we solve that problem. So we teach you how to do that so that you can stop that rat race. We also address support. So the coaching industry is very siloed. We're all trying to keep secrets from each other. For some reason, there is no secret sauce. What is required is support. We want collaboration. We want to work with entrepreneurs and business owners that are excited and fired up to trade ideas, to share information so that we can elevate the industry as a whole. So TEC focuses primarily on providing that network so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to solve these problems for yourself. We put you in relationship with driven, fired up entrepreneurs in this space that you can share ideas with, that you can get mentorship from, and so you can accelerate the growth of your business versus trying to figure it out all on your own. So if any of these three primary pain points sound like things that you have dealt with or are currently dealing with, then I want you to reach out. You can do that at thomasendurancecoaching.com. Click Become a Coach in the top header to get started. You can also reach out to us at enduranceminded.com. We'll put the information in the show notes of this episode. We are looking to work with 100 coaches this year in 2024 to help them grow and accelerate their coaching businesses. We only work with the best of the best. We only work with people that are ready to make a change, that are ready to change the narrative in the coaching industry. And so if this sounds like you, if you feel like you're the right fit, then we want to work with you. We want you to be one of those 100 in 2024. Again, that's thomasendurancecoaching.com. Click the link at the top of the header or check for the link in the show notes. And I look forward to helping you build and scale a wildly profitable coaching business. My guest on this episode is Jay Dichary. Jay is a board-certified physical therapist. He's known for his expertise in diagnosing and rebuilding injured endurance athletes around the world. His latest book is the second edition of Running Rewired, Reinvent Your Run for Stability, Strength, and Speed. And this was an amazing conversation. I tell you, I love Jay's kind of no-nonsense approach to preparation, to mobility, to strength work. Super tactical, very, very helpful. As someone myself who has struggled on and off my entire athletic career with different injuries, from broken collarbones, separated shoulders, back injuries, hips, legs, knees, the list goes on. I've pushed my body really hard, and inevitably injuries have come from that. This felt like a really great kind of way to break through the noise. His book does a great job of giving real world, again, kind of no nonsense tactical guidance on what all these pieces and parts should look like. So if you are someone who has struggled with recovery, you've struggled with injury, you've struggled to integrate strength training in some sort of meaningful and consistent way into your training, you've struggled to break through the noise and the messiness of all of the marketing that's out there in the endurance sports world and what you should be doing with your time and energy, I think this is the conversation for you. It doesn't matter if you're a runner, a cyclist, a triathlete, if you are a general fitness athlete, if you are working on just longevity. That's another place that I love where Jay's approach comes in, and he directs his expertise is just for sustainability and longevity, right? Feel better, do it for longer. I think ultimately that's, for me, that's the end goal is well, let's not fix it for a season. Let's be better for a lifetime. Let's keep coming back. Let's keep working to be stronger, and to continue to enjoy the things that we do, whether that's within endurance sports or just enjoying life, doing other sports, getting out in the world, whatever that looks and feels like for you. So massively packed episode. We dive into all kinds of things from recovery practices to the difference between mobility, flexibility, stretching, what that looks like. We talk about the kind of glutes aren't firing phrase. What do we do with that? I'm sure many of you have heard that, myself included. What does that actually mean? We break that down, what that means for how we should approach our training. Strength training, we spend the latter half of the episode talking about that, what it actually looks like, how to integrate it consistently. So packed with really, really great guidance that you can take away today, actually implement into your life to feel better, be faster, whatever your goals are. So really excited to get this one out to our endurance-minded audience. And I hope you enjoy it. Let us know at enduranceminded.com. And please enjoy my conversation with Jay Dichary. All right. Jay, welcome to Endurance Minded. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. Your latest book is Running Rewired, and I had the opportunity to read it. And as a longtime athlete, and inevitably with that comes someone who has been injured for a long time, on and off. It was incredible. I'm really excited to dive into some of the principles and a lot of the things you talk about. But one of the things that really struck me, and I think it might be a good place to kick things off, is you talk about recovery and about preparation. And there's been a lot of, a lot more interest in recovery. There's a lot more recovery modalities. People are recognizing that it is important. We're spending more and more time thinking about it, adding things to it, buying devices to help us track it. The list goes on. But you talk about how you can't, out recover poor preparation, and that there's a difference there. And that was something that early on in the book really struck me, because like I just said, people are spending a ton of time, investing in recovery, talking about it, but there's really another layer to that, and maybe even a step before that. So I'd love for you to just kind of kick us off by walking through what that means for you, the difference between those two things from your perspective, and how people should think about maybe those two kind of aspects of their athleticism.
Yeah, for sure, Taylor. Thanks. It's you hit a topic which is like in vogue, right? I think where people love to hit the easy button, right? It's nice to get recovery products, which are mostly things done to you, right? As opposed to things you're actively doing. And those are, the passive aspect of using a massage gun, right? Feels nice. Getting more sleep, that sounds great, right? Doing other type of practices sound great to improve your recovery. And we obviously want to recover from workouts. Workouts are what kind of dings your body, right? And then we need to realize the gains from those. So recovery is important, but there's this thing called Wolff's Law, which basically says that, your body only adapts to the stresses it's given. And, we're so focused with everything we do in life is about, frequency and intensity, right? When you look at Strava and all these, people's stuff they're putting out there, it's they say, I went this long and I went this fast. And that's all we as a society sort of quantify. And the reality is that's putting a lot of stress in your body. And yes, recovery from that's important. But, people don't come see me because they say, I can't get my heart rate to go up, right? They come see me to say, I can't get my heart rate up because I'm hurt, right? And so, it goes back to the idea that if you prepare your body for your sport, you're going to have a much lower risk of getting injured, right? And, people always run into injuries, and it's impossible to prevent injuries 100%. Never, it's never possible to say you'll never get injured in this program. But certainly there are things you can do to optimize, the parts of your body to make sure you can keep going and doing all the things you want to do. And so, as much as we talk about, how many days a week do you train? How many, when I try and get in the weeds in, okay, what are you doing during those training days, right? And even people who say I do an hour and a half of core work, a day, I'm like, okay, what are you doing for your core work, right? Does that actually make sense with what the demands of your sport require? So, a lot of this is a kind of a self-reckoning with people and saying, hey, like, what are your goals, right? Like, I want to hear what your goals are. And then everything there is really easy. We just work backwards, right? So to get you to here, we have to have you show up with these tissue capacities, with these, this fitness, et cetera. And let's make all that happen, right? And that comes from following a proper plan.
Yeah, when you talk about that difference between recovery and preparation, what um, what's that definition for you? Because I feel like that's something that a lot of the folks on this show, they're going to be like, okay, I get it. I hear what you're saying. We're not going to get any pushback. But how do we prepare? Because I think that gets really muddied, and people will be drawn to imagine that those recovery modalities and protocols is preparation. And so I want to make sure, because that again was one of, like, early on in the book, even I've been a coach for 20 years, and I was like, I think I've probably blended those, like I speak to them differently, but also in the same sentence or in the same kind of prescriptive, aspects of
Totally.
what I'm doing. So help us take that one step further. What does preparation look like different than a recovery, practice?
For sure. Okay, so let's ruffle some feathers, right? We're going to start off with this right off the bat.
I love it. Let's dive in.
I'm a physical therapist. I ran a biomechanics lab at a university and a private lab for a number of years. I have over thousands and thousands of hours of trying to distill the rate limiting factor of performance in various capacities, right? I've done a lot of published research. I've had a bunch of stuff from NIH to DARPA to lots of entities funding my work. And when we look at things, we're always trying to find out what's the rate limiting step. Why is the needle moving in the right direction, right? And so if you ask myself or a group of biomechanists or tissue physiologists and all these like people who specialize in like all these nuances, what's the best way to optimize bone, muscle, tendon, ligament? Running is not even in the top 10 or even top 20 of any of those discussions, right? I'm not saying running is bad for you. Please don't, hit stop and delete the podcast right now, right? So, but I want to make sure you understand, if you actually run, you're putting a bunch of stress on your bones. And if you don't prepare your bones properly, guess what? You get a stress fracture, right? If you don't prepare your tendons, you get tendinopathies. If you don't prepare your muscles, then you get weakening and you have changes in your stride over time, right? So if ligamentous injuries aren't a huge thing in running, right? But the reality is that running puts certain type of stress in your body will adapt to those loads. But if you want to show up with a body that's robust enough to deal with all the stresses of the sport that you love to do, it takes some specialized preparation. Okay. And so when we look at, bone, for example, running is very boring for bone. It's actually not enough of a stimulus to get your body, your bones and your body to remodel and become, strong and robust. And yes, it's better than sitting on the couch, right? But if you look at the research, it'll show you that bone health running is just barely better than cycling and swimming, which are what? Cycling, you're sitting down, and swimming, you're suspended in water, right? So, I know people may, but you're having impact. I know you think that, but I'm just telling you the research says it's not enough of a stress. Okay. You have to do some very specific things for bone, which is, yes, lifting weights, but also doing plyometrics. And people are like, wait, that's not true. Plyometrics for tendons and for muscle power. And they are. If you do them properly, they can actually improve your bone health. Talking about tendons, as we get older, our tendons get brittle, right? This happens physiologically in our body. We tend to get older. Our tendons get brittle. Lots of people say I have Achilles tendinopathy or peroneal tendinopathy or posterior tib tendinopathy or hamstring tendinopathy, whatever. Okay. Running is not the proper stimulus to improve your tendon health. Tendons are already really great rubber bands, right? They love to shorten in length and shorten in length, and they're awesome at that. If you want to actually have your tendons improve, you have to give them a certain type of signal, right? Mechanical stimulus to actually improve. The fancy word for this is called mechanotransduction. Basically, it says we're using motion to initiate a chemical process inside of our cells to turn on and repair the tissue. And running doesn't do that, right? You have to lift in a very specific way, which is very slow motion, right? Which actually gets our tendons to glide and strains the cells or tendons called tenocytes to remodel and become more robust and able to deal with the things you want to do running, right? And rest will not repair a tendon in any way, shape, or form. I want to make that abundantly clear. Those of you who've been dealing with chronic Achilles issues or hamstring stuff, you say, I took 2 months off, it didn't go away. Yeah, because tendons will not self-heal. They don't, okay? Going back to muscle, right? So people say running is great for strength. Guess what? It's not, okay? Now, is it better than doing nothing and watching Netflix? Of course, right? But if you said, I really want to show up with strong muscles, okay, we know that people who just run tend to get weaker over their lifespan, even as a runner. And then we start to see changes. If you look at all the research, it shows that older runners, masters runners, right, tend to have shorter stride lengths and can't push off as hard and have all these changes. And guess what? It's not an age-related problem. It's not like once you hit 50, your running form changes. It's the fact you lost lean body mass. You lost muscle strength. You lost muscle power. And guess what? You can actually regain muscle strength and muscle power, not by running, but by doing a very specific type of, set rep scheme. And it's not hard, right? It's super simple, but putting some time in the gym and not just doing bodyweight training, right? Bodyweight training may be an entry point, but you have to load tissues to get them to improve. And so this idea behind preparation is, I hope you're sensing a theme here that if you do want to optimize your bone, your tendons, your muscles, right, then we need to do things that turn those tissues on and help them improve capacity, right? So that when you go out there and run, you can show up more durable, right? And that comes from like checking the boxes, right? Making sure you're putting each one of these things in something you're doing, not just in the off season, the winter when it's cold outside, but things you're doing all season long.
Yeah, that brings me to a quote. One of the quotes I pulled out later on in your book was, and I'll read it because I wrote it down. It says, "Simply put, running is not the best strategy to optimize the health of each body part." And with my coach hat on, I was like, "Hell yes! Finally, somebody said it." I've been saying this as we all have in whatever aspect of the sport that we're involved in. It's like you have to do something other than running. And of course, athletes are like, I just want to run. Let me do more running. And I'm like, I promise you, that's not going to get you where you want to go. Lo and behold, they do it, outside of my guidance as a coach but they come back and they're like, oh, it didn't work. You're right. I'm like, we gotta prep. So thanks for the explanation. I think it was super helpful to help me wrap my mind around like just the compartmentalization of these, because it's a busy space too, in the sense that runners and athletes in general, there's a lot of moving parts. How where do you focus your time? It feels like it might be a lot, and like you just said, it's not a lot. It doesn't have to be, or it isn't overly complicated. But knowing what to do, why you're doing it, so that you can show up and do this thing that you do want to do, as well and as long as possible, and I think that's what most athletes want and most runners want, is to keep doing their sport.
And it's interesting, right? Like I think that people think, oh, I have to add this on, and you really don't. I think what you have to do is reorganize your time, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how many of you listen to this podcast spend 10 to 15 minutes stretching before or after you run? Like the vast majority of people listening don't need to stretch. Like the research on stretching is basically showing time and time again that unless you've got, limited range of motion, and that does happen, be clear about that. There are certain people who do need extra mobility, but the vast majority of people don't need to stretch every single day pre and post run, right? So that 10 to 15 minutes you were stretching, why don't you use that same time you already put in and do some things that are constructive, right? And those of you who think you have to do, make your run super technical and all these different, training methodologies, like take a few minutes out of your run and put some things that will give you targeted, improvements. And it's not adding. It's just being more systematic of the way you approach the sport that you love to do. And you're right. People say, I just want to run. I want you to run too. I want you to be successful. I want you to hit all the times you have for the season. I want you to qualify for every race you're trying to get into. I want all those things for you. And just running won't do it. And if you look at the best of the best, no one just runs. I've worked with over 50 Olympians in my career. I can tell you, we do these things all year long, right? Because they're always they're riding that razor's edge, right? Like they could easily, go out and hit a world record, or they could basically just have a little blip happen, an injury, and they fall off and they can't train for 6 months, right? Like we're always trying to ride that razor's edge. And that means we're just trying to stay on top of things and make sure that we're keeping you primed for all things you want to do. So it's a comprehensive all season long plan that never goes away. And that's what you have to do to keep your body tuned up.
Yeah. I want to talk about, we talked about, you mentioned stretching and mobility and flexibility. I want to come back to that because that was another interesting, you make some distinctions there, which I thought were awesome. But let's just real quickly, can you elaborate on for age group athletes listening, or people that are not Olympians, which is all of us below that. What is that? You mentioned like it's year round, right? And I think that's another challenging thing for people to grapple with is like, okay, I'm going to do preparation work in the off season, right? We periodize this and we put it in all these boxes that can get really complex. And what you just said is, aligns with what I would feel like is kind of my methodology and my belief. It's like, it modulates, but it never stops, right? You're always preparing your body in some meaningful way for your sport. So can you just expand on that a little bit? Like, why is that important? What can that look like? So that people don't stop doing those things when March hits and they're like, I'm done with strength training. And you're like, no, right. Like, no, you're not. I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. Okay. Man, you asked me a loaded question, Taylor. All right. So
we can simplify that as much as we need to. I know that there's a lot of water that can be held in that topic. So,
okay. No, let's take this though, because it's interesting, right? So I think the vast majority of runners out there run for, let's say, the vast majority of the year, right? So I'm from New Orleans. You can run. It's warm every day there, right? It's never cold, so you can run every day. But outside of the deep South, right, we have seasons, and so a lot of people, typically when it gets colder, right? So colder in New Orleans is like 78 versus 85, but for a lot of the country, they're covered in snow, right? And so that drives people inside, and they say, okay, I'll do my strength workout, maybe I'll run the treadmill here and there, but I'll put more time in these other things, which I probably should do the rest of the year, but I'm not enough time because I run so much, right? And so what you get is people get stronger, right? People get stronger at that time and they get benefits, everything else, and they kind of feel good. And then they, like you said, March, April, depending where you live, or even May, some parts of the country roll around and we get more time outside and people are pumped to be outside and all the other stuff we did fell off the table. Well, guess what? Just as quickly as you lost strength, you lose it even faster. Okay. And when you talk about power development, which is something you have to kind of keep primed all the time from a stimulus factor, you really lose that unless you're doing a lot of sprint work, which most runners really aren't doing enough of. You lose your power generation really, really quickly. So all those things you're spending time building in the off season don't last all the way until next, winter. They don't. And so, this begs the question of what else are you doing? You live in Montana. I live in Oregon. I mean, I fill my days from dawn till dusk with different sports, right? So, if you're doing other things that do result in higher loads to bone, muscle, tendon, right, that aren't just in the gym, you may get some collaborative benefits, right, that actually improve your sport, improve your body, and actually transfer to running, right? So it's not just about like, there's this myth out there, like everything has to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and strength is important, but strength isn't everything, right? There's also skill. Okay. And running is a very linear sport, right? We're running forward, right? And so, some people go in the gym, they say, okay, I'll do squats and deadlifts. And those are awesome exercises, but they're still training that kind of sagittal plane moving forward and not doing enough to work on rotational plane acceleration and lateral acceleration, right? And if you happen to be somebody who Nordic skis a lot throughout the year, right, then you're already getting a ton of lateral stability work through your hips, right? So I don't want people to think about all this, quote, other stuff as cross training. I think that's a big problem. We said, I run, I do gym, or I cross train. And I like to introduce, when I work with runners, I try to introduce the concept of complementary training, right? I'm not looking to have you sit on the bike and just hold a certain heart rate for 5 minutes, or 50 minutes. That's not my goal. My goal is to give you something you can do that's going to improve your tissue capacity. It's going to improve your movement skill and make you a better athlete, right? And all those things that we're building do transfer over to running, right? So it's not just it's not just cardio and then strength training. There's lots of stuff we can break down and nuances all over the place, right? In terms of terminology, but we're trying to build a better person, right? And a more athletic individual. A more athletic individual does a better job controlling the rotational plane stresses of running, which there are a lot of. An athletic body does a better job controlling motion at each individual joint, right? Which, again, an athletic body does that better, right? So we're trying to build a better movement awareness and a better capacity to succeed. And I think that's one of the things that, I'm not saying you have to do 20 different sports, but if you're not going to just run and say, what else do I need to do? We need to say, are you doing things that are constructive and going to be complementary to your end goals?
Hallelujah. If I didn't want to keep talking, I think we shut the podcast down right now. Like that's the strongest point. I've been trying to make that point for years. Yeah, like athleticism first. That's if you ask any of my athletes, that's a quote I say. I'm like, you have to be an athlete first, and then we layer in your specific discipline, right? You have to come at this with an athletic mind and body, and then layer in these pieces. So it's just great to hear somebody else talk about it. Again, I feel like that's a mic drop moment I could just walk away with, but I'm eager to keep the conversation going.
For sure, Taylor.
I want to circle back to what I said earlier. We touched on mobility, flexibility, stretching. These are three things. Mobility is also, correct me if you think this is wrong, but it feels like that's kind of come into more of our kind of like common vernacular, right? In the last handful of years, people are like, okay, I get it. Like that's different than stretching. It feels like stretching's still on the table, but like you said, people are recognizing that it's not the be all. It's not like phys ed class when we were in school where we, cross our legs and do the bounce up and down and like that, we thought that was it. So we've started to kind of understand some of these pieces and parts and the role they play, but it still feels very gray. And you do a great job in the book of breaking that down and outlining what that looks and feels like. And so I'd love for you just to expand on what those things are: mobility, flexibility, stretching, and if and what role they play in an athlete's life. When do those things happen? When should we be thinking about them? When does that language need to come into play or not at all?
For sure. So, let's use, we hear every single day, right? Sitting is going to kill you. Okay. Let's back this up for a second, right? So it's no surprise, I love, Chris McDougall's book, Born to Run, right? It's the idea that we're humans designed to run, designed to do all these things. And yes, we are. But the problem is our society, our lifestyle we live in does not echo that framework at all, right? We sit down at a computer for most of the day. We watch Netflix. We put our shoes on and suddenly we think we're going to the Olympics, right? That's not how the world works. So, through sitting all day long, we do have some changes in adaptive changes in our muscle lengths that can occur, right? So, there are people out there who are literally spending 14 to 16 hours a day at a computer, right? There are, okay? And so if the more you don't do things, tissues in the front side of the hips become short, tissues in the back become lengthened, right? That can, over time, right? If you don't move your hips into extension, that can create some imbalances where you have a hard time getting a nice stride, right? So to stride, when you run, you have to strike in front of your body. You have to push out the backside. And one of the problems we see is that when people get tightness in the hip muscles, instead of having that nice kind of pendulum of the leg, in front and behind the body, that pendulum shifts more forward. So they kind of adopt an overstride and they don't really get to push off back behind the body, which means they're compromising the elastic energy that's stored in their tendons and actually making running a whole lot harder and a whole lot less efficient than it needs to be. So some people say, okay, well, great, then we need to stretch your hip flexors. And you might, right there again, we said there's some people, if you never really move your hips into flexion, extension, like, let's take this for example, a lot of cyclists, right? Cycling, your leg is bent up in a flexion or it's at neutral. It never really goes in extension on the bike. And then they sit at work all day long in flexion on a computer, and they drive their car in a flex position, right? You're never taking your hips up in an extension. And they say, okay, I want to try a triathlon, or I want to do something, go for a long hike or do something different, right? And they've never really taken their hips into an extension position, and they might actually have some true shortening of the hip flexor muscles, and they might need to actually stretch their hip flexors, okay, for sure. But the vast majority of people, you just lost the skill of controlling your hips. And some people say, oh, well, if you sit a long time, your glute muscle shut off. No muscle shuts off, okay? That doesn't happen. But what does happen is we have these things in our spinal cord that govern the way we move, which are called central pattern generators, right? And so if you move well, right, if you're very supple and you're strong, you have a good rhythm for the way we walk and swim and all these cycle, all these things that are reciprocal. And when you put an injury in the mix, or you put some types of shortening that modifies that pattern over a long period of time, what happens is we lose the ability to use our hip extension muscles, our normal walking and running kind of gait cycle, right? And so we do see changes in running form. And then people say, oh, I need to change my form. Well, before we talk about form, let's talk about, again, that mind-body connection and wiring your system to move properly. So we said some people do have a length issue, right? Your hip flex, it's like when you go to the amusement park and you say you must be this tall to ride this ride, and you're just not, right? So you might actually have to lengthen those muscles. And that happens. And if you're one of those people, and you say, okay, I'm going to hold a stretch, and you say, how long? 10 seconds. And you say, I feel great. Okay. Well, guess what? If you've done the research, and my lab group at UVA did the research on this, right? We actually looked at, if you actually want to stretch a muscle, you have to hold a stretch for about 3 to 5 minutes, 4 to 6 days a week for about 10 weeks before you actually see structural elongation of the muscle fibers. Okay. Now, that's the minimum effective dose to see tissues truly elongate. Now, how many of you listening to this podcast have said, that's garbage because I stretch for 15 seconds. I feel right through my hips. I can move them nice and freely now. I'm not saying stretching isn't working, but I'm saying you're not actually stretching. Stretching is holding tissue in a certain length position to actually result in mechanical length of the muscle cells. Dynamic stretching or dynamic mobility is basically taking your body into a position of tissue length, which resets your nervous system to allow your body to access the motion you've got. So if you're somebody who held a stretch for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, even 2 minutes, right? And you felt better after your stretch, you don't need to hold soft tissues in a long position for a long time. You just need to tell your nervous system, hey, calm down, let your brain access the range you've got, right? And then hopefully we're actually not just swinging our leg back and forth, but then strengthening in those positions too, so we're going to control those for long periods of time, okay? So we said there's static tissue length, there's dynamic mobility, right, which is a neural reset, and then there's kind of the foam roller stuff, right? These are the people who say, hey, if I, put my hip hook in or do my lacrosse ball thing in my hip, I feel much better and more supple. All you're doing is applying pressure to your body. That's it, right? Now, I'm not saying it's not helpful, because it can be helpful. You have lots of receptors in your body that absorb that pressure and tell your nervous system, hey, calm down, right? Let me move. Let me start to access this mobility. And so all your massage guns, lacrosse ball, foam roller, even if you go to a masseuse, right, they're not physically unwinding tissue tension. I know people say that. Your collagen tissues in your body are 10 times stronger than the tensile strength of steel, okay? I don't think any massage therapists their hands are actually that strong, okay? Certainly mine aren't. So, be clear about what you're doing here. And then the fourth group, right? So let's say you're somebody who's tried to get range of motion gains and you feel like there's a door jam just stuck in the door, like things just won't move. That typically is what we call an arthrokinematic limitation. And so you can imagine if two surfaces need to move, right? One has to roll and glide the other surface. And so sometimes you get some problems in the way the joint moves where those sliding surfaces aren't moving properly. And that can create some trauma in the joint, imbalances, all kind of stuff, right? And so that's the kind of stuff. If ever you've been to a PT and then manual therapy work where you're trying to actually glide surfaces of your joints, doing these little weird wiggles around, that's not stretching like you think about muscle and tendon. You're actually trying to glide the joint surfaces. That's called an arthrokinematic limitation. So, to put all this together, right? So mobility is important, okay, for sure. And you want to have enough motion for the sports and activities that you love to do as a human. And so if we find that you don't have the motion, stretching is always the answer, right? If you just say, I'm going to go ahead and hold my hips into, a kneeling hip flexor stretch, which I kind of show in my book, that might be great if you have a tissue length problem. But if you have more of that kind of just, I'm actually fine on length, I just don't use my hip flexors, I'd rather have you do some things to activate the hip extensor muscles, get you an extension. If you're somebody who's done that kneeling hip flexor stretch and say it's not helping, you might have something arthrokinetically going on that you need to have addressed to actually help your hip move better. So, if you find that like all my friends move this way and I just can't move that way, and I'm having a hard time, it's probably not just stretching. You probably need to be a little more focused into what you need. In Running Wired, I try to take this and I put some self-tests in there to figure out what do you actually have to work on to help people sort of find this. But, certainly there's no harm at all with finding a trusted physical therapist in your community and say, hey, can you put me through a battery of tests and sort of find out where my weak links are? Because, again, I know people just want the pill. There's no magic pill, right? But there is a magic plan for you, right? And so you find out where you exist in that continuum. Man, we can help you target those imbalances and make those things go away.
I love that. I appreciate you breaking that down because I think seeing those or helping people recognize where they're at kind of on a continuum, right? Is that it's not, oh, I need this and this is all I need, right? And I think it, it can change, it changes too as your body adapts, right? You're deeper in the season and you're doing more training. Like that preparation is probably different and how you need to move to prepare for those, so it's always evolving. And so just recognizing kind of what those cues are, I think is massively helpful, because we also people, when you get comfortable with a movement, you come back to it, right? And you're like, well, I've been doing the hip flexor stretch. I'm just going to do that every day before my workout, no matter what. And like, there's a point where, is it really what you need? Maybe yes or no. That's I love that. There's a lot. Um, there's a lot in that you touched on that I actually want to pull out. One of them, you talked about the mind body connection, and in your book, you talk about the proprioception and kind of the link between like focus and attention on, I'll call it training effectiveness. I'd love for you to break that apart for us a little bit, because I think that's there often can be, I find, as a coach, just a bit of like a set it and forget it mentality, right? We want to zone out, or athletes like to zone out. They do things that are purposefully play to their strengths and are easier. This would be certainly like a primary discipline. If you can just go out and run 5K and you don't have to worry about that, that's what you default to, right? And versus this skills development, which you talk a lot about, and break that apart. But walk me through why that matters and how that ultimately adds up to equal the athletic body and the person that we would like to be.
Yeah. Okay. Let's rewind here a little bit. A few years ago, and there was a lot of focus on running form in the kind of lay media, right? And then because you have to improve your form, you have to all these things, right? And so you have to change the way you run. The problem with that is, if I say, hey, Taylor, you're doing this when you run, I want you to now do this, right? I give you something else to think about. Two things happen. One, you hate me because I'm making you think about extra steps, right? You're just trying to run. You're having to psychoanalyze yourself as you're running. You get frustrated. Okay. That's one thing that happens. The second thing is you hate me again because when I change that central pattern area, that normal reflexive way you like to run, when I change that, it's actually less economical. You're using more energy to run and you feel stiff and ratchet and weird. You're like, I don't like this. Okay. And so the whole reason I wrote the first version of Running Rewired about 6 years ago was to basically say, look, I want to put the best you can into your sport and the best you can into learning new things, right? And so I try to have people back up and say, look, running form is worth talking about, and it does matter. But let's use our example, the person who sits a lot of the time. If you have really poor hip mobility, okay, and let's say you don't work on that, right? And I tell you, hey, Taylor, I want you to do a better job of striding out when you run. Okay. Well, guess what? You heard stride out, which means I want to push off more back behind my body. And so what you decide to do is, because you don't have good hip motion, you start to hyperextend your low back every single stride. And then you're like, okay, this guy's an idiot because one, I feel funny when I run, and now my low back hurts. Okay. I didn't tell you to arch your back. I told you to stride out. Your body compensated by saying the only way I can get my foot behind my body is to arch my back. So what I'd like people to do is, again, take the time, work on their mobility as they need to, and strengthen into those new positions, right? And that's not just, again, not just moving weight around. That's literally getting that mind-body connection and learning how to feel and understand what you're doing. And so we talk about building that mind-body connection. Most people don't have good awareness of driving their hip back behind their body while keeping their upper body stacked over their pelvis, right? They tend to move both at the same time. And so to build that, we do a sequence of movements, right, to try and get you to do a better job of driving your hip behind you while you keep your spine stable, right? And then we eventually want you to drive your hip behind you while we keep your spine counter-rotating, because that's what happens when we run, right? And so when you look at the idea behind focus, and thank you for saying this word, it's really important. We do exercise. A lot of people put music on, right? And they got a training partner in there in their gym or garage with them, and you're talking, you're not really paying attention. And just moving doesn't modify that central pattern generator I talked about earlier, right? Central pattern generator, to review, that's a normal reflexive way that you move, right? If I just said go run, everybody's going to run differently because that's what you've practiced for years or decades of time, right? So it's your best compensation for your in time. And so if I actually want to change the way you move to eventually change the way you run, that requires focus. And so when I talk about focus, we're not just talking about doing reps. We're talking about thinking and, more importantly, feeling movement, right? And so I try and get athletes to do things that they can feel them move properly. And if they can't feel them move properly, I try and block certain things, right? For athletes who can't drive their hip behind without arching their back, I'll put a foam roller between their torso and the wall. So they can't move their spine without learning and feeling how to move their hip, right? So it's these modifications of movement designed to try and get your body to feel proper motion. And after you practice that a long period of time, your body actually makes some chemical changes, right? We secrete these neurotransmitters called norepinephrine and acetylcholine, which actually create a chemical process to change and rewire your nervous system. And that is actually called neuroplasticity. Okay, so neuroplasticity is a chemical change that occurs to change the way you move. And those chemicals, here's the important thing, are not released unless there's proper focus on the task you're doing, right? So again, if you said, coach told me to do this, and just hearing things and not really processing and not focusing on them, you're not going to change the way you move, and you're not going to change the way you run, and you're not going to have a result you want, right? So I want people to take a step back and say, look, if we can get you to become more athletic, right? Learn different movement skills and put those skills into the way you move. And then once you know how to drive your hip behind you without cheating your spine, then gate cues are effective. They're tremendously effective, right? Because you've been there before. You've been there hundreds and thousands of reps and know how to move. I'm just saying, hey, Taylor, do me a favor. This neural thing we've been working on for a long time, I want you to kind of cue that right in your gate. And that's when we actually see things pay off, because now you're saying, hey, you know what? I feel better when I run. I'm not as burnt out, right? And I'm not as stressed after my runs because I'm more efficient. Like, everybody's happy, right? That doesn't happen in a day, doesn't happen in a week. It takes weeks to months, right, to get those changes to occur, but they will occur and they can occur. And if you talk about really like completely transforming your run, that's what it takes. It takes focus.
Yeah. I love that, because I mean, it speaks to that. We touched on it, a bit of that kind of magic pill with strength training, right? Is it's not the immediate kind of fix. It's not the thing that we can buy, and as we well know, that's, so often what people are looking for, right? Like, what's the thing that just solves it? And I love that, because it speaks to the need to, we've lost a lot of that, or certainly some athletes have lost a lot of just that, like, perceived exertion, right? Like, just what is your body telling you, right? There is this innate need, or this very real need, to just understand the feedback your body gives you. And when you have that focus piece, that's when you're able to actually understand what that means, right? When somebody like me says, hey, go out and run today by feel, like, or let's, move, check in on your body. Like, what do you need for prep work before this session? And a lot of people are like, I don't know, like, what do I need? And I'm like, well, you gotta focus, right? You gotta check in. You can't just put your earbuds in and zone out. And so that's something for me personally has just been massively important as part of my training for years. It's just like, no music, take my shoes off, check in, right? Take a second to kind of, I'm coming in hot like a lot of people, right, from work or travel or whatever. And it's like, okay, let's just take a breath. All right. What do I need to do? Let's focus on some skills. How do things feel from left to right? So I thought that was just awesome to hear that kind of called out. It's just like, oh yeah, that's, let's focus, right? Like you're
Yep.
here. We might as well get the most out of it. Right. And I love just that, hearing that like chemical adaptation or that change too. Like when you focus, it actually yields better results. All right, let's switch gears for a second. I want to talk about what it means when people say your glutes aren't firing. We hear this all the time. This has become pretty commonplace in athlete vernacular. We certainly hear it when we go to the PT and when we work on our run form, wherever this comes up for athletes. I get this feedback all the time when I talk to folks as they say, my glutes aren't firing. So let's just break this down. Can you explain to us what it means when we actually hear this term, what's going on in our bodies, and help us understand what we're hearing and what we should actually do with that information if that's something that we're handed.
Totally. So let's do a little demo to make this really easy. If everybody listening to this just stands up for a second, okay, and just let your arms relax at your side. And all I want you to do is take one arm, I don't care which one, and just reach out to your side so your arm is at 90 degrees to your body, right? So you took part of your body and put it to the side of you, which changes where your center of mass is, right? Where your weight is over your feet. And when you kicked your arm out to the side, you didn't suddenly slump and fall over, right? Your postural muscles were able to hold you in position. They actually activated before you moved your arm. When you thought about moving your arm, your postural muscles kicked on to say, hey, we're about to take our arm away from our body in a different position. We're going to look pretty stupid if we slump over, right? So we'll try and make some type of correction to hold our body stable as we move our arm, right? So our body makes our postural muscles in our body, which hold us in positions, not like, I don't mean posture like a rigid military posture, right? I'm talking about holding you dynamically as you move, right? So we make those changes subconsciously, right, to get us in a better position. Again, that subconscious thing is really important, right? So if you move well, those muscles all know when to fire, right, and to do a good job to hold our body in position. So when you hear your glutes are shut off, it doesn't mean that your glute muscles are literally the nerve that goes from your brain to your spinal cord, which is your inferior and superior gluteal nerve for your max, glute min, and glute med, right? We don't mean those muscles are severed. What we mean is those muscles have movement functions, right? They drive our hip into extension, but they also have postural functions. They play a big role in how we stabilize our pelvis on top of our hips, right? And so when we get tired, a lot of us tend to do what? We let our pelvis kind of dip forward, what we call an anterior tilted position, which changes the muscle length of not just your glute muscles, but also your hamstrings and your hip flexors and your quads, right? So now you've got a positional change that's happened just because certain muscles aren't showing up to hold themselves in position. So what we're trying to do, again, this idea behind rewiring is basically just a simple word for saying that neuroplasticity we mentioned earlier, right? We're trying to change that discussion to get our body to kick things on the right time or right amounts to hold our body dynamically stable as we move, and holding and propelling us dynamically stable as we move. And that's what we're trying to do, right? So say, hey, take the muscles you have. Yes, we can always make things stronger. Stronger is always nice, right? But let's make it a reciprocal thing where it just happens automatically, right? And that goes back to, again, modifying that central pattern generator we talked about. I know I keep going back to this neural things, but I'm trying to get people to focus more on, again, on focus and on feeling movement, right? And changing the way you feel your body move. And yes, strengthening, right? But when you change the way you move and change the way you feel, you can get those changes that we see, right? And then so people say, oh, I saw a video of myself running and I looked sloppy. Well, I was just tired. Everyone gets tired, right? Like, I don't know anybody who doesn't get tired, but guess what? You can prepare for it, right? Like, if you know how to self-check in, like one of my students ran a marathon yesterday, right? So here in Bend, or 2 days ago in Bend, he's like, yeah, I'm really tired and sore. And we were just talking. He's like, yeah, I couldn't believe how much my form fell apart towards the end, but I was sort of thinking about those things we talked about in class, right? And then he's like, I was able to come back to stacking my torso over my pelvis, right? And then pushing the ground away behind me. And it was kind of cool to hear him say like those check-ins, right? Like we've talked about those concepts in class, and said that, look, you're going to fatigue out. It's going to happen. But if you have some little check-ins and focus points to kind of think about and bring your body back to your best position, guess what? You're going to maintain your economy and you're going to maintain your propulsion and run really well, right? So a lot of this idea is not glutes, shutting off. It's them you're not being used as part of that proper stability and propulsion function. And again, you can change that for sure.
I love that focus on body awareness. That's great to just come back to the importance of, like we talked about earlier, just making sure that we have some sort of grasp on what it feels like, and having that awareness in our bodies to make some adjustments to get involved with that feedback loop. I think that's such a great reminder. Let's let's switch to a tactical solution here. So what I've found, as I'm sure you have, is so often we don't know what to tackle when it comes to doing things better, right? Fixing our running form, running more efficiently. As athletes, so often we just want to do the things we like to do more frequently, right? So we tackle things with more volume, and we think that maybe if I just do more, I'll get more efficient. And certainly we can develop some skills as we run more, for instance. But I'd love to just go through some tactics of what does that actually look like to be a better runner, to be more efficient, to tackle some of these things that we deal with, overuse injuries, glute imbalances, hip issues, the list goes on. What do we do to actually integrate this into our training in a way that feels productive? Because I think there's just so much information out there, and there's overload, and as athletes, we don't know where to start. We don't know what to tackle first. We don't know what's the highest and best use of our time, and so we fall back on habits, or we feel like we don't have enough time in the day to do what we need to do. So I'd love for you to share. You do a great job in your book of outlining some of these tactical solutions. So I'd love for you just to take some time to walk us through what that can look like in practice, in reality, so that we can actually be our highest and best.
Yeah. So let's go back to the idea about elaborate one little point there because it's excellent. So remember we said that if that central pattern generator governs the way we normally do reciprocal things like walk, like run, like ride a bike, like crawl, right? Swim, all things you do which are kind of repetitive. You don't think about that. You can think about it, right? If I ask you to run and take a jump every third step, you could do that. It'd be really weird, take a lot of brain energy, but you could do that. You can modify things. But if I say just go run, you're going to run the way you normally run, right? And so if I modify, if I just say, hey, let's do that for 2 hours a week, 20 hours a week, all you're doing is just practicing that reciprocal pattern that you've built over time, right? So if you said, hey, I want to actually, all right, Taylor and Jay convinced me, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my form and make myself better, right? So what does it take? Well, it takes you getting out a sheet of paper. Like, this is how simple life can be. I want you to take a little sheet of paper out, and I just want you to make a little grid like a calendar, right? And I want you to, have Monday through Sunday, or whatever, Saturday through Sunday, however you define your weeks, okay? And I want you to basically put a grid, and I want you to write. You can write in there the days that you're going to go do your cardio. It's fine, but I want you to write in there 2 days a week that you're going to do some form of movement awareness, okay? In the book, I call these precision workouts, which take a max of 15 minutes, okay? They're not long at all. And I want you to make a minimum of 1 day a week to actually do some strength and power work, right? I don't care where I have some suggestions in the book on where to put those in, but you need to find time for those 3 workouts a week, right? So again, 2 of them are 15 minutes. Again, most of you are already spending, 10 minutes, 15 minutes stretching. Just don't do that. Do these. They work, okay? And then the 1 day of work that I'm asking you to do some strength and power work, that may be time you have addition. It may be a case where you actually say, hey, I have to cut a run out to fit that in. Guess what? Awesome. Okay. Because you're getting time to practice what? Dissociating the movement out from your hips, improving tissue capacity, building better tendon strength, building better bone mass, right? All the things we talked about, we're creating time and space for those. So it doesn't take reinventing the wheel. It's very specific in how we can do these. And I have different protocols built in there for masters runners versus, younger runners and so forth. But the more different stuff you do, the more you get better at doing different stuff, right? The more you get to learn and move better. Just making some specific goals for yourself, right? I want to learn how, I've been dealing with chronic shin splints for a long time. Okay, fine. I want to find time to work on controlling my foot on my shin, right? that means getting better at controlling pronation. Pronation is not a bad word, just motion that your foot and ankle move through, right? And so you don't have good control of that pronation. That overloads your tissues and is causing your posterior tib to flare up, which you're calling shin splints. If you then worked backwards and said, okay, I realize I'm having that because I don't have good foot control. I don't know what you say foot. And I just go, what the hell is this thing attached to my leg, right? You don't even know where to begin. And I'm trying to get you to focus on how to feel position motions and feel, activation of your feet, which gets you to go, wow, never done that before, and work on that for a long time. And as those tissues get better, as you learn the skill of controlling your foot and ankle, guess what? That posterior tib doesn't have to do as much work. And therefore that posterior tib can finally relax and actually improve, right? So these are the type of things we have to say, what are you willing to make time for? I try to hit a plan and running a wire to hit all the bases, right? I mean, we hit everything because I want to make you a well-rounded runner. If you've got something particularly flared up because of whatever use injury you've been dealing with for the past, 6 years, but ignoring, right, until it flares up and you do something else for a little while and let it calm down. But you have to make time to fix these things. And so again, volume isn't going to fix this. Taking target action will, right? So find that piece of paper, put some days in there you're willing to do some extra work. And again, consistency always wins, right? Like doing something once is nice, right? Doing something 3 times is great, but doing something, 100 times, wow, man, that's a powerful effect.
Okay, let's talk strength training. Like I mentioned before, so often as athletes, we just want to do more of our sport. And I've found as a coach, one of the things I spend most of my time doing is pulling back on the reins, right? I would rather someone do less volume in their primary sport or their primary sports and more preparation work like strength training, like mobility, like the things that you've outlined here, than go for another run. So let's just answer the question. Why is strength training important? Can you condense it down for us and help us understand why it's something that we need to spend our time on? Even though the science is out there, we are getting more and more information that lets us know that it is something that we shouldn't sacrifice, and it is an integral part of our training. However, it's something that we're still working to integrate. It's not something that everybody is doing consistently. A lot of people don't know what to focus on, what type of strength training to be doing. So let's try to put this to bed once and for all here and now. Why is it important? Help us understand what's going on with strength training and why we should do it, and integrate it into our training as consistently as any other aspect of our training plan.
Love this. Why should you do strength training? Because it'll make you more robust, more durable, and it will make you faster, period. Okay, now let's take that nice statement back out of there. Okay. So if you run, right, we said you're applying a certain amount of stimulus to your bones, muscles, tendons, and your heart and lungs, your physiologic capacity is basically pumping blood to make you move, right? That happens. But that engine, right, needs to apply power through all your physical parts, right, which are your bones, tendons, muscles, right? And so the stronger your bones, right, think about it. If you basically take your car and you get plowed by a bus, your car is not going anywhere, right? So if you performed so poorly in your preparation, you gave yourself a stress fracture, and yes, I've actually talked to my patients like that, right? Like, congratulations, you were so negligent the way you prepared and took care of your body, you actually broke a bone, okay? Like, that's on you. Okay, well, guess what? Taking specific steps to improve your strength and improve that your power development will actually improve your bone health. Okay, we said before, if you just go run, right, you're practicing that normal motion pattern, that muscle memory, that central pattern generator, but that's not enough of a stimulus to give you a mechanical tension in your muscles to actually cause them to become overloaded, to become actually stronger. Okay. And then, so we do 2 things. We talk about strength. I know in lay media, we say strength training, but there's sort of 2 aspects of strength training. One is what I call just dumb ox work, which is basically saying, can you move the weight? Yes or no, right? Strength training, we don't care how long it takes you. We just say, can you move this weight from, the start to the end position? That's it. That's strength. Power is different. Power is how fast you can express your strength capacity that you have. So we need 2 things to happen. I need your strength capacity to go up, and I need your brain to learn how to control that strength development faster, right? So when you can apply more force down to the ground in a shorter period of time, you will actually get increased stride length for the same effort. So if everyone wants to know the one key number that matters, right? The most important number for running economy is something called rate of force development, okay, which is how quickly you can produce your force. And if you have a proper strength and power plan, right, built into your again, all year long calendar, you keep that strength, you keep that neurologic reflexes primed to deliver more force down to the ground so you can run faster, point blank, right? When you're more strong and more powerful, you can control those reactions at your foot and ankle, at your knee, at your hip, at your spine, faster to get better control of your body, right? And so more running will not result in the overload to build those tissues to generate more force down to the ground. It won't. Okay, so people can say, hey, I just want to run volume, and you will get great changes in your cardiovascular development. That's awesome. I'm not saying that some focus on volume is important, but to say that running more is going to improve your strength capacity, it's been shown time and time again it doesn't. Okay, will running improve tendon development? It doesn't. Does running improve bone density? Barely over swimming, which is a non-weight bearing sport, and cycling is kind of a non-weight bearing sport too, right? So again, you got to be specific. I don't mean to sound preachy, but you call me when things don't go good, right? And I'm sick and tired of getting calls on, hey, I've got my peak race in 2 weeks and I've got this thing flared up. Well, how about we do a better job at building a plan for you all year long so you don't call me in a panic, right? You're already stressed enough about your race, right? You throw an injury on top of it, you're trying to mitigate and like, oh, well, should I do this race or not? Because I have another cup in 2 weeks. It's like, it's this whole self-deprecating beatdown we'll get into, right? So let's change the dynamic and say, look, we're going to make time for this stuff and it's going to change the way you feel. And I'll just say this, there's a lot of pushback. I get it because people don't like to change habits, but I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I have never put a runner on a dedicated strength and power plan and had them stop, ever. You don't need to say anything. They tell you, I feel like Superman every time I go out. Like, I can't believe the me that I have today versus the me I had 10 years ago. Like, I'm transformed, right? And it's because they're doing the work in the right way. And I think that's what it gets into. It takes consistency. I can promise you, those of you who never lifted before, you're going to hate me. You're going to hate Taylor because you're going to say I'm sore. It's going to be sore for a few weeks. Don't worry about it. Okay. Don't start your strength and power plan 2 weeks before your peak race out of the year, right? Do it in a time where you've got more time to recover, let your body adapt, but you're going to adapt. You're not going to be sore. As long as you do this stuff, you're not going to be as affected by it in terms of negatives. You're only going to have the positives. And one more pearl on this. Some people say, I don't want to strength training to get big and bulky. You know how much volume of sets and reps you have to do to get bulk? It's ridiculous. Like, you're not going to get bigger. You'll get stronger, you'll get more powerful, but you're not going to gain lean body mass. Okay. You might say I look better. Yeah, you might look better. Okay. But you're not really gaining muscle mass. So don't let that complaint bother you.
Yeah. One of the things people don't understand is how much you have to eat to put on muscle mass. We endurance athletes worry about this, but it's the massive amount of calories that you have to consume to actually put on muscle. The amount of protein that you have to eat is just obscene. So the fact that, we worry that some strength and conditioning and some preparation work is going to help us, is going to cause us to quote unquote bulk up or put on mass is just not the way the body works.
Let me put that in a context here for people. This will be kind of funny. So I swam my entire life, right? And I got into running and did a bunch of tri stuff for a little bit. And I kind of was bored for a little while. I went through a meathead phase in college. And I had some stupid goals on weight I wanted to move, right? I won't sound like a meathead and say those, but they were high, okay? I was eating 6,000 to 7,000 calories a day, and I could barely gain the weight I was trying to gain, right? Like, I went from my comp weight was like 148 to 150. I got up to the whopping range of 172. Like, I mean, I was trying to eat all day long, right? So you're not going to gain that much weight. And I wasn't doing any cardio back then, just lifting, right? So my point is, it's really hard to put on that much muscle mass.
I'm glad we put that to bed. And the plans that you outline in the book are super well-rounded, and they're designed to help runners run more efficiently. They're complementary to those primary disciplines, to running. And so there is a difference, right? It matters what type of training we're doing. To your point, right? You can have the goal of trying to bulk up, quote unquote, and eating like crazy and really trying to put on mass, or you can have the goal of doing things that complement your body mechanics and complement your body composition so that you can run better. And so there is a distinction in the type of training that you do, and it matters. And again, your book outlines that really well, and the types of movement patterns that we should be focused on so that we can be better at these specific disciplines.
And I have some things in there. I'm going to say this. There are some people who look at those plans and go, wait, this is for my upper body. Why am I doing something upper body? I'm a runner. Well, guess what? Those of you who've seen a picture of yourself when you run and you start to fatigue out and kind of slump your shoulders, right, and start to fall in, it's really hard to breathe well here. Okay, so yes, there is work in Running Rewired to try and get you to do a better job of controlling your shoulder blade position on your spine and getting you better overhead mobility and getting you better torso mobility. And because guess what? That factors into posture, right? So years ago, I was asked to give a talk at a conference on the influence of upper body mechanics on running. And I started Googling things and there wasn't much in there at all, hardly anything. So there's a few studies out now, but I actually did a project where I said, okay, I'm going to have runners come in. I had to run different running forms, right? Just changing upper body position only, nothing else. And we actually saw that you can actually impact your running form by as much as 8% just by the position of your upper body and lower body. So this stuff is worth talking about, right? Like most of you listening are probably deciding whether you should go spend $400 on a pair of super shoes right now. Well, guess what? You can improve your body double, right, what a gain of a super shoe would give you for all your runs for the rest of your life if you actually take some, again, take some action to improve your body. So this stuff is worth your time, and more importantly, it will pay dividends.
Let's go a little deeper on specificity because, again, I want people to walk away from this episode with really tactical guidance on what they should be doing. And I think there's so much misinformation and confusion around what do I actually need to do when I go to the gym. Again, you've outlined that really well in your book, but people get looped in or lured into thinking they have to do what their training partner does or another friend does, or and they don't know what actually is going to support their goals, their body type, some of their movement pattern issues. So let's go a little deeper into specificity, and if you could just talk about what does that actually look like, and what can people do?
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like a lot of people think, oh well, I don't want to do strength training because I want to do CrossFit, right? Like there's nothing wrong with CrossFit if you approach it the right way. There's nothing wrong with and CrossFit does a very different schema designed for a very different type of skill set, right? Like so, if you say I'm a runner, we're going to train you differently. No elite runner does CrossFit, right? CrossFit is fine. It's great for the goals of CrossFit. But if you actually want to say, okay, I want to, the skill set for running is very specific. So the stuff for running Rewired is targeted towards the specific needs of a runner, right? I work with a bunch of ski team and snowboard athletes for our country, right? And so like we have them on different type plans because skiing and snowboarding are very different, right, than running. I work with a bunch of cyclists. Those plans look different as well. So again, to me, it's actually really simple. I just look at the demands of the sport. I basically back out, okay, what do we have to do? How can I improve those capacities for the sport people want to do? How do I build a skill set for those sports? And that's it, right? So just because your friend or your neighbor goes to the gym doesn't mean you have to do what they do, right? The things we're doing it's not just cross training, not extra stuff, take your time. It's complementary training, things that are going to improve the thing you want to do, which you want to run. I just want to run. I want you to run too, and I want you to keep doing it for a long time and have a blast.